thank you for everything that you have done that means that we can come into your presence like this without all those sacrifices that the Jews had to make in the Old Covenant. Lord, thank you that you've opened the way to yourself into your throne room. So we come before you asking you now for your favor, for the outpouring of your Spirit among us. And we pray, Father, that as we discuss these issues, that the decisions that are made will be of you and will advance your kingdom. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Larry. May I ask you a favor? Is just if you can, make yourself visible so that we can talk to each other, to real people. That would be nice. Thank you. That's so much better to see. Okay. As an introduction, I want to thank you for your prayers for last week, and we did have a good week at TRACS. At the conference, I felt it was very refreshing, at least for me. And it was good to see many small schools and smaller schools than we are struggling with similar issues sometimes and just sharing our experiences. The pre-accreditation visit went on well on Monday with Temne, and he made a list of recommendations. I'm going to ask Brad if I can share the report with you all directors, but I don't see any reason why not. One of the issues we need to tackle is the level of our course objectives. It's good that we have a good framework for our course outcomes, but we need to word them at the highest levels of Bloom's taxonomy and get rid of the demonstrate and understanding and all that one. So we'll review those and work on those especially. I'll try to make share a summary with all faculty regarding all the recommendations that we have, and we'll strategize and plan forward. Hi, Brad. Welcome.
Brian and I were in the wrong room, but we were having a good time in that room.
Sorry.
So I don't get an invitation for academic council meetings, but Gwen gave me off of Carolyn's calendar what she thought it was. So we were both, and Brian had that too. So I can vouch, we both had the dog eat our homework. So.
Hi, Martine. Sorry. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Brian. No problem. Good to see you all. I just summarized our experience at TRACS and at the pre-visit. Brad, would it be okay to share the report, Temne's report, to all of the directors, so Absolutely. That they can read it, and at the next directors meeting, which is 2 weeks from now, we can strategize together.
Absolutely. We'll have to say kudos to Judy and her team, which is, many of you are on her team. You know, even though our representative, Tan May, did not want to say in front of his boss that we're a lot further along than probably anybody else that ever has been, we were. And so that's because Judy has done a phenomenal job, and built, a lot of y'all contributed to that. So we are in better place than ever have been, and probably than most of the people in TRACS when they do this, because of Judy's leadership. And so Judy, thank you for that. It's a great place to be in.
Thanks.
Yes, clap, yes. I got coffee cup, let me clap. So thank you, Larry. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Before we start, can we have a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
This is Wayne, so moved.
Anybody second?
I'll second.
I second.
Thank
We
you.
both second.
All in favor and unopposed. Thank you. The first item on the agenda would be to, I've asked Brad to explain to us why he vetoed the PhD project last minute and what are the steps forward so that we can free him for any other commitments that he has on his calendar. Brad, yes.
So first of all, I want to apologize, especially to Claire, for your hard work that I had to veto, to Martine for having to veto that. It was the right thing for me to veto it, but the mistake is not being more ask intensive earlier in the process. And the mistake is I made some assumptions earlier in the process that were just wrong assumptions. And I want to quickly kind of walk through what I think are the mistakes that I made. And so, first of all, we've had 2 decades of discussions by the regents about a PhD program. And that would be, and so Glenn Smith led a whole meeting in Cape Town in 2010. In Budapest in 2011, there was an hour discussion of it. And Glenn was leading that, Willie and Gwen Dewey, and to some degree, Anne-Marie Kuhl. All of that was in the back of my understanding of where our PhD program was going. And so we walked into this with that understanding. And the models that we had looked at were the OCMS model, which was not a classroom intensive model. You go 2 weeks to London. It's connected with the London University. 33 research methodologies are surveyed. They figure out kind of what their dissertation is. And then after that, the whole rest of the PhD is mentored. And that was a model we talked a lot about in Cape Town. And then Willie, PhD, was 3 classes and the rest is mentored. So I walked into this with the assumption that more people understood those 2 decades of conversation. And that's a wrong assumption. And Claire, that sets you up for failure. But that was what we had. The other issue is I made the wrong assumption that y'all understood what the regents are for us. And the regents, every time we built a new program, we are responsible to the Board of Regents for them to be our customer check. And so because of that, I've never brought a new program to the Board of Directors unless the regents had signed off in a pretty intensive way. And so, but again, that's not normal for most schools. There's no way you would have known that. But we say because we're a global school, we cannot go forward unless the Board of Regents has been involved. They've done their focus groups and they say, we think this program is consistent with the values and we feel like we can recruit people out of our regions, our direction. It's not US based, it's US centered, but it's global. And so 2 things that you didn't understand is the role of the regents, and I did not do a good job of explaining that. But that was a huge assumption that was missed. In our April 6th meeting, there was a task force that had been built in February for the PhD discussion among the regions. And of course, that was built, and so what happened is in that, there was a discussion that Gwen, Willie, Anne-Marie, and maybe Randy was going to join that. Here's where I messed up, is you had an advisory team, and I understand now after talking to Martine last week, that there was a division between the task force to build the PhD versus the task force to decide to do a PhD, and I didn't understand that. And so when we talked about the task force of the regents that had Gwen, Randy, Anne-Marie, and I think Doughton was also, Willie was going to be involved, my assumption at that point in that conversation is that would be the task force with the task force to build, that there would not be a difference between the task force to build it and the regents task force that would make sure that it was customer oriented with people that knew the customers. And so whenever I talk to Martine is, how is the task force doing? Are they doing the Peter Drucker 5 questions? I didn't realize that it was a task force that was really separate from the regents. And so I've learned from Martine Claire that you had Lester Hurst, Melissa Cox, Paulette Jordan, Glenda Riley, and Glenn Solomon that are part of that. But yet none of those had any part of the 2 decades of conversation. So there's no way you would have known that. And there's no way that you would have understood kind of the framework and the values of how we start new programs. And the question that I probably should have done very clear in that regent meeting is when we agreed to have that regent task force that you were going to lead, I should have said, who's the point person for making sure that Willie, Gwen, Anne-Marie, and Doughton are involved? And I didn't do that. And so I'm sure, Claire, you were expecting somebody else to do that. I was expecting somebody else to do that. I think Gwen was expecting to be invited, but there wasn't clear on who was supposed to be the person to make sure the regents were doing what they're called to do, what we require them to do. And so that was my fault for not being clear on who's the point person and to being ask intensive. The same thing happened at our board. When the meeting was presented at our board is always used to going through the Peter Drucker 5 questions. And that's a very important thing for all of us. We've been using the Peter Drucker 5 questions on every key decision we've made since 2002. And that is trained in every one of our degrees. So what happens is if those questions aren't used in presenting, there's a confusion because there's not a sense of what's our context. And that's just how all of us are used to. You didn't know that because that's not coming in from another school. And so what ended up happening is the board got confused. And if you recall, they said, well, we need to do the Peter Drucker 5 questions. I offered to train you on that. And of course, Martine said you didn't need that. You were very familiar with them and you were good with it. But what ended up happening is that was part of the misinterpretation at the board level in June, is because they are always going to ask the question, what's the mission? Who's the customer? What is the customer value? When something's presented without that context, no way you would have known. They're going to immediately react to that. And so they did. And so that's why we got the delay. So then when you and I talked on August, and said all those is in the documents, I dug through all the documents I had. I could not find the Drucker stuff. When we got to September 25th, and I realized it was, that was the first time, certainly our leadership team and Willie and Gwen and others that I talked to realized it was a $33,000 PhD, not something we had seen before that. And so again, should have been ask intensive even in April, saying, what is this? What's the price? Are you sure you're supported by us? All of that, you were left out in the cold on that. And all this history and our values and everything we're used to, you were kind of walking into it and didn't get connected into what is important for us for a decision. And so, so what ended up happening is I'm responsible to bring something. If I'm going to bring something to the board, I have to agree with it. If I'm going to bring it to the board, the first thing they're going to say, does the Board of Regents agree with it? Willie did not agree with it. He felt like it was a violation of our values. Gwen also felt like it wasn't right. As I talked to some other people, the board said, we don't know anything about it. And so that forced me to have to say, we've got to slow it down. Claire, you were wonderful to say, okay, something's off here. And so she asked me for 2 hours on a Saturday. I walked it through. I thought Claire asked all the right questions, understood why we were doing this. But again, you were caught, and had to create something that embarrassed you and embarrassed Martine by having to cancel that at the last minute. My hope is we can get to the point that we have a successful approval by the Board of Regents and a successful approval by the Board of Directors. I felt like you were very ask intensive on that Saturday morning, and then I sent out that whole long email about steps that I know Martine and y'all have worked through. As a result, you and Martine came up with a beautiful design. The change in that design is wonderful, excellent. And I think we have a process of getting that ironed out, fleshed out. We have a process of getting it approved through tracks, which we're working on. The benchmarking that you provided for me was very helpful. Martine and I had a good discussion last week. So I feel like we're on a track now that is consistent with the 2 decades of conversation about the PhD, and that we're on a track of something that we can get approved both by the regents and the board. It's financially viable. I think it's a good design. And what I wanted to do is just say, and to show you how off I was, okay, is to show you, and this is important for all of us, is these questions are just essential. And those of you that have trained this, you know that every one of these questions has 25 questions underneath it. And it's depending on the size of your organization. But it is so critical. And so if I could do it over again, and this is to show you, this is how we've done new programs in the past. So I've been a part of launching the Magul, the MBA, the DTL. I was not part of launching the DMINS. I don't think it was done exactly this way, but certainly the other ones. And then of course, this process was followed a lot by the MATL when we were redesigning over the last 3 years, and it's been a 3-year process. But the kind of how it's been done in the past is we have an ideas initiated. And Claire, if I'd given this to you in February when we first were talking about the Regent Task Force, this would have solved 1,000 problems. And so now I've wasted all your time. And so now I've got it, but it's not, this is not to show what you should have done, is to show what I should have told you to what our process is and what we followed in the past. But new ideas initiated comes from different places. Sometimes our customers have, that's where the Magul came from. A broad proposal is shaped and it's approved first by the academic dean, then by me, and then it's brought to the regents. Then I bring it, after the regents mess with it, then I bring it to the board of directors. At each step, somebody says, what about this? I don't understand this, I have problems, and it's not answered, they're just recorded. Then a task force is developed to develop a new program. However, it includes key faculty, regents are always involved, never have not been actually. Sometimes a board member. So when we did the MBA, we actually had 2 solid days of focus groups with our board of directors because they cared about it. Sometimes they're not involved. And then outside experts, depending if that's needed. So what we did then is a process starts. And the group, the task force, which includes regents, always work through the 5 questions, but they don't go all the way. And so then we had task force, we have focus groups. So we did 3 focus groups in China on the MBA. We did them in Africa. The regents helped to organize that, and they were live focus groups. We didn't have quite the technology of Google Forms back then, and really got into the language of the customer. So by the time we got to 6, we knew how to answer the Drucker 5 questions. What's our strat? What's our mission? Who's our customer? What is our customer value? And so we actually know the language of the customer. And then based upon that, we came up with preliminary budgets. Then we would go back to the Drucker with Drucker questions 1 through 4. We never got to 5 at that point, and just reported, did focus groups with our regents, other regents and board. Financial projections are approved. Then we would actually start the work of actually building the syllabuses. And this is where I faulted in not giving you this framework. Again, expected that we had regents involved who knew this framework. But again, didn't say who is the point person to include that. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that's done. Even customer focus groups like the MBA, we went back to those focus groups once the details emerged. Once the design and budget is adjusted, there's an institutional change form that is prepared, given to the dean for approval, who gives it to me for approval, who gives it to the board of directors for approval. I never can send an institutional change form to TRACS unless the board approves it. And they are going to ask, Brad, do you approve it? And of course, I'm asking, did the dean approve it? The institutional change form is sent to TRACS for their approval, and then plans are developed to launch for TRACS approval. And so that's the process we've used in the past, except with the DMIN, because I don't know what we did there. And again, if you had this in February, and if I had been clear in April when we talked about the Regent Task Force and assigned people to that, to follow up with who's the point person to make sure that happens, I think a lot of this could have been avoided. And certainly the embarrassment of having for me to cancel it at the last minute would have been avoided. I do feel like, though, Claire and Martine, y'all have done a great job of responding, adapting, and the design that you're coming up with is excellent, sellable, marketable. I think when it goes to the regents for focus groups, I think they're going to respond very favorably, and I'm committed to be a champion to move forward on it. The other issue is we just have to think about some financial viability issues, which I've explained to Martine. She's working on it, thinking about it, and certainly we'll bring those up at the right time in the right place. So let me stop at this point with the final thing of, Claire, I apologize. Martine, I apologize. I should have been much more ask intensive, should have given you that checklist based upon our history back in February, and I should have been very clear on who's the point person to make sure the regents are involved back in the April 6th meeting.
Thank you very much, Brad, for giving all this explanation and the background issues that were at stake. I was wondering if anybody has any comments or questions after this. Claire, especially.
One of the things that Bill knows this, and some of you all have been around, Larry knows this, we are an odd duck as a school, and I reckon I should have been more clear on that. We are so customer oriented in how we form our programs. And I realize we've had that issue happen before where people have come in from other schools We just have a different process. The regions are centered to that process of being customer oriented. And I think one of my mistakes is I've lived here so long, I make the assumption that everybody gets that. And yet, how would they if they're coming from a school? And I obviously worked at Dallas Seminary, was on the board of directors and regents for Texas A&M University. My goodness, this is rare and unusual. It is who we are. It's how we are formed. But I constantly, in this case, of course, made the assumption that that was obvious. It is not. And we are very different. I think it's a good difference. It's our calling. But I think it sets people up for failure unless I take responsibility to really help people understand our values.
Thank you, Brad.
My apologies. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I had a problem with my connection. I accept the explanation and apology that has been given. And I just want to make some comments that I hope are helpful in going forward so that when BGU does another program like this, that there would be whoever is asked to participate with you, especially if the person is from, well, whether or not the person is from the outside or the inside, there's some basic things that I would hope would follow going forward. The first piece for me would be documentation of the steps that have just been described, full documentation of those steps. I've done this before with other institutions, so I know that that is very important. And the second piece has to do with a clear description to the designer in terms of what you are looking for. The third piece I would recommend is acknowledging that whoever is designing that program has certain foundational understanding and knowledge. For example, the issue of the Drucker 5 questions, that is basic to anybody who is designing curriculum, whatever the context that person is working with. So when I said that we had it, I know we had it because that is the foundation on which you build a program or a curriculum, the mission of the program. That's where we begun. That was clearly stated in terms of the overall mission of the program, the student learning outcomes, the core competencies, the proposed program goals, the program description. That was the foundation of the design that was used. The customers, even before we looked at the mission, we did a survey of the BGU students to ascertain their interest in a proposed PhD program. So that was foundational. The values of the customers was linked to the customers, and the survey was designed to get both to the interest of the customers and their values, and that is documented. The results of the program, we benchmarked the program, we looked at other programs in the context of what we had to offer. So I say that just to underscore that anybody who's designing curriculum, the Peter Drucker questions is where we start. So those are the things that I would like to just observe from this process. Of course, it's a process from which we can learn, but my first thing would be that there's a full documentation of this process that has just been described to us. There's some other things that I could say, but I would say them in private to Brad and to Martine. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, for sharing.
This is Bill. Let me just ask one question. I haven't looked at our policy and procedures manual for a time, but are those steps laid out in the PNP manual, Brad?
No, I just wrote them. And so what I was doing is
Okay.
looking at what we did with the Magul. It was actually the Magum when we did it. And what we did, we had that because it was inherent in how the regents work. And
Right.
so I got that actually from the regents and Drucker. But the regents actually were always our customer connection. So I just did it that way with the Magum, the MBA, the DTL. And of course,
Right.
Randy knew that. So that's inherent knowledge for anybody who's been here for a long time, hanging out with regents, long meetings with regents. We all understood that, and our board of directors understands that. But there's no way that somebody coming in new and fresh would understand that. So what I'll do is, of course, I'll send that to Martine because she would be responsible for initiating a new program. She can adjust it with a faculty team, with directors, and you can put that someplace. I'm not sure it goes in a faculty handbook, but it goes someplace where it could be accessed in the future with more detail. But what I was doing is reflecting on how we did the other degrees based upon my knowledge of how regents work and what the regents had asked for. But again, there's no way that Claire would have known that because she hasn't sat in days and days of meetings with regents and had to lead in our value set new programs like I have.
Right, yeah. I'm just saying, making sure that is in our PNP manual.
Yeah,
I know
I think
tracks would be, deft on that issue, of course. They want everything documented, so.
So I'll send that to Martine and Judy, and then y'all figure out the best place to go in. And you may want to engage other faculty on that and regents. The point of that, though, is customer orientation and involvement of the regents, who are our customer representatives. That's their job.
Hello, this is Gwen, and I apologize for being late and just now joining, but I think Bill's point and Claire's point are well taken. Everyone has to know. I think some of us who started from the beginning, like myself, I have been working with the regents. I knew this was what regents did, and as president, and yet we worked together. And I remember these early programs. Actually, in the beginning, when we started our D-Min, we just brought in the program that Bakke was already doing at another university. And that was what was acceptable to the new board. So having had time in history, it's easy to overlook. So I apologize, and I would be very happy to help with any of the academics or any of these questions. And I look forward to really having time to share with Claire in the future and more with Martine. And I'll be in more meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen and Bill.
Lowell, you've been around forever, Methuselah, and so any thoughts you would have, just wisdom and spiritual reflection and corrections on my part on what I've shared. So Lowell, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I got in, Brad, in the middle of the so I really don't even know what has been decided or why. I did not get here early enough. I had to get down to an appointment. So I'm sorry, I don't have any input because I don't know the context of what's gone on already this morning.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
But I do feel like Methuselah.
Thank you, Lowell. We hope that you are feeling better. Thank you for coming on. Anyway, we were discussing, Brad was accounting for the reasons why he vetoed the PhD project at the last meeting and explaining a little bit the way forward. Okay, so if there's no comment on this one, we'll free up Brad. If you're willing, you're welcome to stay or welcome to go. And Claire and I and Brad and everybody, those who are going to be involved, will try to restructure and share with you how we are going to move forward.
I hope that at some point when you're ready to share that to this group here, because I think they'd be excited by it. And then we've got to get it to the regents, and I'll be happy to really work on getting their attention and making sure there's a small group, and Gwen is key to that, as well as Willie, to really investigate it and then get it to the regents with referrals. And then I know Kurt Risley and our board would love to be involved in that as well. So I think we can really get to a successful engagement, involvement, and then the conclusion. I think there's a process moving forward, and love to help with that and to make sure there's ownership.
Thank you, Brad. I appreciate your willingness to work with us.
Very
Okay.
excited by the new design you've come up with. I think it's really ingenious.
Judy, do you mind leading for a couple of minutes? I need to open the door to Samuel. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So the next item on the agenda is Yvonne Osman's dissertation proposal. We had already approved it via email in September. We just need a motion to approve the e-vote. So do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
This is Wayne.
I second.
Okay, I'll give it to Bill Payne this time. I gave it to Wayne the last time. You guys are tied. Motion by Larry, second by Bill. Any opposed? Hearing none, we will pass that one. The next one is Steve Thompson's dissertation proposal. I'm hoping you all had a chance to look at that. Do we have any comments, recommendations? I know it's an unusual one, and Bill, maybe you want to share a little bit about Steve's dissertation itself. It's quite good.
Yeah, let me share on that just a bit, because it is a bit out of the ordinary from what we've done with some of our standard dissertations. Yeah, originally, Steve wanted to write a book. Basically, it was an autobiography almost in that book form. In talking with him and Martine, both of us talking with him, we tried to discourage him from starting with the book. We thought a book would be a good outcome of the dissertation, so we asked him to go through a dissertation process if at all possible, and he thought that was true, and then his supervisor, Dr. Gill, thought that was probably appropriate. He's kind of made his dissertation, especially in consultation with his supervisor, Dr. Gill. He wanted to make his dissertation organized, topically. He would cover a lot of the major mechanics within the introduction in terms of even the research methodology would be covered there in some form. And then he wanted to go ahead and organize the rest of the chapters. I'm just looking at it here on the screen, Called by God to Wall Street. And that, of course, is the focus of his dissertation, Spiritual Conflict and Warfare on Wall Street. And then the Ultimate Performance Review, which is kind of accountability of Christians to God, even on Wall Street. And then chapter 5, his conclusion is really, he's calling Transforming Wall Street. And what he's said there is that he really believes that the transformation process will grow out of his research. And I'm just going to make a little side comment, because Claire and I have been talking about this issue the last few days, just in relationship to the research methodology. And I think we're coming to, a little better understanding, even of the transformational process. And, this is going to, I think, would have good application to a lot of things that go on when we're thinking about the way we do programs. But I think, and Stephen says it here, he says that his transformational strategies will be developed out of the research that he's doing on Wall Street. He said, some of those transformational processes could be, a website, some focus groups, etc. But at this point, he doesn't know specifically what that transformational process will look like until he's gone through the research process. And I think Claire and I both, as we've been thinking about this issue, are seeing there's a lot of wisdom in that kind of an approach. Too often, we can go into a dissertation with the transformational process in mind already. And I think it's fine to have something in mind, but if we're going to really use research the way it's to be used, both the understanding the problem more in depth, even understanding our purpose, and understanding what will be the appropriate transformational process should grow out of the research. So I think that's a little bit of a different twist that I'm seeing wisdom in really emphasizing that fact in our research course. And I'd welcome other input on that, because, as I've said to Claire, the transformation process, of course, has been central for our curriculum all the years I've been a part of BGU since its inception. But I think if we're not going to just look at research, and Larry and I talked about this too, that we can't just look at research that it's somehow just going to validate what we already want to do. The research needs to be a central piece to start with, and the transformation has to also be a central piece, but the transformation process needs to grow out of the real research process and not just go in with a presupposed approach. So I think that's good, and I'm saying that because it seems to relate to what Dr. Gill and Stephen are both thinking in terms of, he's over there right now. He's on Wall Street doing a lot of interviewing with people, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what kind of a transformational process is going to emerge out of his research there.
I would agree with you, Bill. Having worked in old institutions and old churches to try to bring renewal, the absolute worst approach is to assume that the new pastor coming in knows what he's doing and knows how to do it, and then goes in and does it and convinces people that I'm right, you're wrong, or rather than going in and discovering what God is already doing, discovering what already works, discovering where the strengths already are, and build on it. Transformation is not the new person coming in with outside grace of wow, look what you've missed all my life, but the new person coming in who says, I'm going to find out what God is doing that works and encourage others to join with it. And that's the only way transformation is going to take place in old institutions, and Wall Street is certainly an old institution. Yes. And it's also the other thing he will discover in that is he will be able to uncover points of connection by meeting people there that have not met each other. And the gift of the outsider coming in to do research is he gets to tell people, it's the very same thing as we do when we go in and do a consultation in a city. We don't come in and tell them what to do. We come in and find points in a city that others might be one block away and have no idea that it's going on somewhere. And to be able to put those people together will be the greatest gift that Stephen will be able to bring into that process, along with the spiritual development that he knows that he wants to bring into there. But he will be able to find it. Taking the time to listen is the AI approach of what, but it's also what transforms all places. So I would agree that for somebody to come in and say, I know what's going on, and we've had dissertations where people from the outside have come in and said, I know what's going to happen here. This is how we're going to do it, and I'm going to research to make that happen. I think that's a foolish approach to transformation of old places and broken systems.
Amen.
Yeah, Bill, I totally support what you said. I've seen too many of, and I've only done a few dissertation supervisor roles, but somebody starts out with an idea and they're bent on doing it, and the research just becomes window dressing. Mm-hmm. And so I really think you're right on this. As I looked at Stephen's paper, would it be possible for him to strengthen a little bit the at least the possibilities, maybe expand a little bit on the possibilities of what he sees could happen? I don't know, but we've been so practitioner oriented that maybe he could expand that a little bit, not committing to it, but just from what he sees now, this looks like what could happen, but it may change.
Yeah, I was just kind of reading here. He says, in the end, I will sketch out a transformational strategy for promoting holiness and renewal on Wall Street, including what needs to be done and by whom. The strategies developed from the interview work I do on Wall Street may involve innovations such as websites and a Christian coaching center located on Wall Street. And I want to be helping people on Wall Street to see what godly leadership and influence could look like. So he's mentioned two possibilities: a website and a Christian coaching center that would be actually geographically focused in that area. So I don't know if we could actually ask him to do any more than that until he's really done some more research and thinking.
Maybe you said that he started out with the idea of a book. Has he dropped that? Has he dropped that idea?
Well, he'd like to do that eventually, but he feels like, in terms of what he wants to do on Wall Street right now, this will be good. What his intent originally was thinking that, if he could write a book and distribute that, that would somehow begin to have the kind of, effect, influence, which, we know neither here nor there if that's be true. If that's his intention, to have that kind of influence, to just put a book out there, he would have no idea, of course, what kind of influence that book is going to have. So I think the track he's on right now, doing the research and then allowing the transformation process to grow out of his time there on Wall Street. I think that's exactly where I think we need to be going.
Yeah, and I do too. I agree with that.
I think it's safe to say that if there's anybody who fits 1 Corinthians 1, 16 and following of the passage, the ignoble coming in to confound the wise, it will definitely be Steve. He does not fit. His context is not Wall Street. It's where God is leading him, and it's crazy. And so his story certainly will be part of that process. There's no question, because of how beloved he has been in the city of New York. But he needs to discover more and more, though he has had contact with and worked with that area. I'm thrilled that he's open to going in and discovering rather than coming in with a solution in there. And what he'll discover, he'll put into practice. That's one thing about Steve. Wherever he's been, whatever he's discovered, he's put into practice, and it's brought about change, whether it be in his church or in his business or everywhere. But he's 72 years old.
72, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and he is not set in his ways, saying, he has a direction where he thinks he's going, but he's open to listening. He was open to what he learned at Gordon. He was engaged in everything he got in here. So I'm just excited about the fact that a 72-year-old is willing to go in and instead of just throwing, here I am, I've arrived, but taking the time to listen and then put that into the context of, why did God send me here? So I don't know, Larry, where that's going to go. There will be a book, and you'll probably have to read it because he's in your generation and my generation. But this is a unique experience of theology and process how God uses people.
And for those of you who don't know Stephen's background, he's a former New York Jets. So he's quite known in the sports arena, especially in New York. He's actually in New York, doing the Wall Street research, but he's also there for the 50th anniversary celebration of the New York Jets. And then, of course, he's, been in business and gone into pastoring, after his sports career. And so, an autobiography will be very, very interesting, I think, when he does that. But I think the autobiography at this point, I think, needs to come afterwards, after he's kind of done what he wants to do here on researching Wall Street and developing some kind of a transformational process that will, emerge out of that process.
Well, thank you all for your comments. Do you think we are ready for a vote? Can somebody move to approve his proposal then?
Yes, I move to approve.
I second.
Thank you. All in favor? None opposed? Thank you so much. It was very fruitful discussion. Thank you. Moving to new business. We're just confirming two, no, sorry.
We actually have 5, Martine.
Yeah.
We have a new one also. So there are 3 doctorates and 2 masters, and I can pull up the application checklist for the Kaplagat, I think, MISIC, that I don't think anybody has seen yet. How do you pronounce it?
I really don't know. I'm he'll sign things Kip, so you can say Kip.
Kip. Okay.
So we have 2 DTL and 3 Magol.
No, 3 DTL, 2
3
Magol.
DTL and 2 Magol. So I don't know if Brian, do you want to talk to them? Tara Bates is already in class, but Brian, do you want just to quickly review the 3 DTL applications?
Yeah, absolutely. Tara's great, and I talked to her last, and it was over the summer, so I did review the document and just reminded. I think she'll be a great fit for the program. She does a lot of work with women's ministry.
Yeah.
I think she'll be really interested in the women in leadership track, and so yeah, highly recommend her. And sorry, looking for the other ones here.
Kenny 10.
Oh yeah, Kenny. So this is really great for us. Kenny, again, I won't belabor the point, but he's in Singapore, and if he gets into the program, he's going to bring. They're hoping to recruit out of Singapore between 40 and 50 new doctoral students for us in the next year is their goal. That Jeremy and Kenny had said. So he's actually extremely influential there, and they'll be full paying students too. So more to come on that, I'm sure, a little bit later, but definitely need to get him in. And I had a good laugh with him, just a really funny story, because I set up this Zoom meeting, and it's always interesting trying to set him up between the US and Singapore with the time differences. And my plan to meet with him right after another meeting led me to rush, and I was going to try to get into a Starbucks and meet with him, and the Starbucks ended up being closed, and I had about several hundred pounds of candy in my car that was piled up behind me in the back seat for a big harvest party that our church was throwing. So I said, well, if this is where it has to happen, this is where it has to happen. So I Zoomed meeting with him with a whole pile of candy in the middle of a random parking lot, and we had a good laugh over it. It was not a very formal meeting when I interviewed him, but that's the kind of guy he is. He has a great sense of humor, really warm and welcoming. So highly recommend him. And what was the other one? I'm sorry.
Kip. Judy, do you have his name?
Kiplagat Missick. It's been a little bit since you've interviewed him, and he's not on that list. We got him in just this week, so I have his.
Yeah, could you just share your screen real quick?
I've got it up on my screen if you want.
Okay,
that'd be awesome, Judy.
That'd be great, Judy.
I'll see. Let me just find it. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so Fuller Theological Seminary,
that's
Intercultural Studies, and this was Martine's interview.
That's why I don't remember that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think you were traveling, and Martine offered to do it. I do know he's planning a payment plan, and he's going to put his application fee in that. That's his plan.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely has payment issues that we need to be following up on.
Isn't this the program at Fuller that our graduate is the director of?
Mary Glenn?
Yeah, no, not Mary Glenn. The gal who was in from the Midwest, but she was working did a doctorate from not Singapore. It was I can't remember her name, but I think she's director of this program. She was hired after she finished our doctoral program. When that was at the same time they wouldn't partner with us because they didn't think our doctorate fits theirs, and then they went out and hired our graduate to run their master's program.
Oh, okay.
She was from. I'll have to think about it. I'll have to think of her name.
Lowell, wasn't she an Asian? I can't remember her name.
Yeah, she's an Asian, and she was in Taiwan.
Taiwan.
Working in Taiwan. I met her in Manila. She came to Seattle, and she was really struggling in many ways, though she was a brilliant student. But when she graduated, she didn't know where her role was going to be, and when she got that degree, it was just ironic that they would hire her as their first international director of the master's program, but we couldn't send students, we couldn't transfer credits or anything like that with them because they thought our school was supposedly doesn't meet their standards.
Okay, thank you for the background information, Lowell. So can we have someone moving to accept these 3 DTL students?
I'll make the motion. They all seem like great candidates and really exciting.
Any second? I'll second them. Any opposed? All in favor? Thank you. Yvonne, do you want to speak to the 2 Magol applicants?
Thank you. Judy, could you put them up for me, please? Do you have that up?
I don't have their application checklists. You want me to just share my screen of the minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's Adrian Toten and Michael Otieno. Okay. Do you want me to get the...
Thank you, because I just wanted to get the names.
Okay.
Both students I have met with, they have shown an interest in and a desire to be a part of the program. I am not sure about the financial side of both students, and that would have been the only concern that I have, and I had asked them to discuss that with Caroline. Michael is involved in inner city renewal. He wants to be able to take what he's learning from here to really innovate and to add to, get ideas for the work he does in the inner city.
Thank you.
This is Carolyn. Yes, Adrian in particular is a part of the Romanian pastor group, and there seems to be confusion about his payment, and it doesn't seem like there's funds raised. I know Willie's there now, and hopefully we'll make some progress with that group in Romania. And Michael is part of the group with Chris Rock, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm not clear on how his payments will come either. I believe that some of those Chris Rock group that's in the Dominican Republic now were going to be paying Chris while they were there, but at this point there has been none received. So that's the 2 that I'm aware of. But continuing to pray that their finances become available. So that's all I know.
Thank you, Carolyn. And it seems that the Chris Rockers group have received a scholarship, some kind of funding, but we have not seen it yet.
Yeah, it's actually Chris's group received a grant, but I don't believe he hadn't indicated he was going to pay tuition with it. It was to cover the expenses of the event that he's hosting. So, yeah, it's a whole ball of wax there, but just trusting the Lord for them. Yeah.
Thank you. So do we have a motion to approve the admission?
I approve, Martin.
Thank you. Any second?
This is Wayne, second.
Thank you. All in favor, none opposed. Thank you. Let's pray for more applications next month. And thank you for all your work in recruiting. We have a few extensions to approve. Lovejoy Tirivepi applies for MCC 710. Melvin Cross is trying to finish his work on servant leadership. He submitted a part of his work and promised some last week that he has not yet submitted. And Ollie Goldburn needs an extension approval of his independent study with Brian. So can we have a motion to approve?
If we can, yeah, if we can just do the extensions, I would
Yeah.
like to
First.
share Audley's.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask Brian to talk to Audley's.
Yeah. Well, I have some questions about the outcomes. So if we
Okay.
can just get a motion on the other, then we can talk about this one.
Anybody can move the approval for the 2 extensions.
I so move.
Wayne.
Thank you. And second is already there. All in favor, none opposed. Thank you. So, Audley Goldburn, Brian, do you want to speak to that class, that independent study? And then Judy can make some comments.
Yeah, so first of all, Judy, apology from me with everything I've had going on. I haven't been able to be as detail-oriented with helping him put his proposal together as I might normally do.
Yeah,
So,
just to let y'all know, I just got it this morning. So I was trying to make a little bit of edits. I kind of cleaned it up. But I did notice that some of these outcomes we probably want to look at.
Yep.
Yeah, so the big picture is, I'll just give the big picture and then you guys can have at it with the learning outcomes. I wrote my dissertation on youth mentoring and transformation and the lives of vulnerable young urban people. And that's what Audley approached me about shaping a course around that, because that's some research that he wants to do. So we had that conversation prior to this term, and then I had the city immersion and some other stuff, and he hadn't really worked on it. So now we've been communicating back and forth and talking about this, putting the reading list together. And so now we're at the point where he has this in. I'm willing to work with him to shape this class and to make it a great experience for him and meet BGU standards. But then as I hand it off here to Judy, the learning of outcomes that he put in, we need to probably tinker with these and bolster them a little bit. So
yeah, we'll need to work on the outcomes, definitely. Could we have a conditional approval of this syllabus, this proposal, upon the revision of the outcomes? And I have not seen it either, so I cannot approve it either. So we'll just do a conditional approval. Would that be okay? Or do you want an e-vote after the proposal has been reviewed?
Judy, what would you prefer?
It doesn't really matter to me. We can do a conditional approval knowing that the 2 of you will clean those outcomes up.
Okay, so I'll do, if we get a conditional approval from everybody, then I'll work with Judy and Martine. I'll make sure you see the outcomes and that we have those ready to go.
Okay, so do you want to move for this conditional approval?
Yeah, can I make that motion?
Yeah, you can. Anybody wants to second? Okay, I will. All in favor? None opposed? Thank you. I just want to tell you all, we are past the hour. If you want to leave for another commitment, please feel free to do so. I'm sorry that it's been extended, but we had an introduction that was a bit long. Some discussions that, okay, before the discussion, does anybody have any student issues to bring up?
Martine, this is Gwen.
Yes.
Will we be doing faculty approval later?
Yes, on the agenda, it's in the discussions.
Very good. I haven't seen that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, first point on the following part is the setting up of solid guidelines for alternative discussions. It looks like we have not moved on that, and I was wondering if we can just set up a committee that will work on that with Bill. Would that be okay with you, Bill? Yes, Carolyn, sorry.
I'm sorry. When you mentioned about student issues, I would like to just bring everyone's attention, or at least Brian, and I know you, Judy, and Larry spoke about Demetria Wilhite. And I spoke to her yesterday, and she is really keen to move forward. I know there is a discussion pending with her regarding her TOW, but she was waiting to talk to Brian regarding her next steps. So I just want Brian to be aware of what's happening with Demetria in case she reaches out to him. But she's not totally new. She's only taken one class though, and has had, like so many of our students, they start out and it's like all hell breaks loose in their life and their schedule. And she has really pushed to come through that, which she is struggling to do. So maybe, I don't know if this is the forum to brief Brian in that, but I wanted him to be aware of that. And then also, Carl Chadband is another one that was struggling to finish. And he too, he had mentioned he wanted to do an independent study and was going to work with you, Brian, but I believe that then with Pittsburgh, there was no rush that he do it right then, but I just want to get him back on your radar that perhaps we come up with a plan for an independent study for Carl that would allow him a little bit more flexibility in his work schedule as opposed to a formal class. So I think that's two that I'm aware of. So
thank you so much, Carolyn. And it was a good reminder. Brian, on Monday when we meet, can we? I'll brief you, and I'll probably try to bring in Larry, so that we can discuss Demetria's situations, because she's failing basically Larry's class. So we need to strategize with her and with Larry how to help her to acquire the skills that she needs, if she can.
Sounds good. She did send me an email, and I emailed her back about.
So if you could meet after we meet with Larry, I think that would be much better.
Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for bringing those two up. That was needed. Now, Bill, alternative guidelines for alternative dissertation. Do you want us to set up a committee now, or do you want me to do it, or do you want to do it on offline?
Yeah, anybody from this group that would like to be on a committee like that, I'd welcome them, of course.
Don't be too fast to move. Okay, why don't you send an email explaining the purpose of the committee and get some faculty as well, and then
I will do that.
And I'll be happy to help you out. Just to encourage you. Okay, we have two adjuncts that we want to adopt in our family. We have Gelu from Romania and Jeremy Guiv, one of our DTL alumni from last year, I believe 2017, who is leading the African and the Asian, sorry Gwen, the Asian initiative. So I believe you have reviewed their CVs. Gelu has been working with Brad and is a friend of Brad's for several years. Jeremy Gui, we know, some of you may know him as a student. Gwen knows him as a partner. Anything you want to add, Gwen?
Thank you, Martine. I'm just pleased. I think he will be a wonderful addition, bringing in not only the students that are alumni from the just a second, from the Biblical Theological Seminary there in Singapore, but throughout all Asia, because we have plans to extend this. But the beauty is that he has offered and will serve as a local time zone relevant person that students can contact and ask questions. Because as you all know, our time zone difference is quite great between the US and Singapore, and other parts of Asia. So this will be wonderful. I think it's a great addition. He has much to bring. He is extremely competent and very dedicated and loves BGU.
Thank you, Gwen. And he has done a webinar for us a few months ago, about 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you can mention to him, Gwen, that I'm in France, and so I work in the mornings with Asian students if he needs to talk to me.
Very good.
Do that.
Very good.
Can we have a motion to accept those two adjunct faculty?
So move.
And I'll second. Okay. All in favor? None opposed? Thank you all.
Thank you.
Sorry, Gwen, did you want to say something?
No, I just said thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Lord, for bringing those people.
Thank you, Lord, for bringing him to BGU and for the assistance and help and just serving as a wonderful local Asian contact. Thank you.
Gelu for leading the Romanian group.
Martine, and what about
Mihai?
Yes. Are we going to wait on him?
I emailed you. We don't have any enough transcripts in English. I don't know, Judy, what do you think? And people were not able to review him.
I can just tell him. I mean, it's fine, really. I just knew you had thought about bringing him this morning, so we'll just wait. I think that's really a better.
Well, if we need an e-vote, we can always do it. We are going to do an e-vote for a dissertation proposal that didn't quite make it yet into this meeting. We want to give you enough time to read it. So if we need to move him at the same time, that would be.
We can do that. Especially Mihai is not going to be a POR since he doesn't have a doctoral degree yet. So there's no emergency yet. Thank you. Curriculum issues. There are some issues that we need to address as per TRAC's recommendations. So I'm going to discuss them once you have received the TRAC's report. And possibly we can discuss some of it at the directors meeting 2 weeks from now, or and continue the discussion at our next academic cabinet. Syllabi approvals. We want to approve the e-vote of October 8th. I move to approve. I really had asked that they add a local Dominican text in their required readings, but they didn't. But I have no control on that part. So anybody can second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Brian. All in favor, none opposed. Thank you. Regarding policies, we started a discussion on second reader payments. Bill, are you ready to discuss that, or should we table?
I'm not sure what else we can say. I think last time Carolyn had mentioned, it's a financial issue would be the main drawback at this point. But I am in the process right now of doing the revisions for the dissertation handbook for 2019-20, and I would really like to use the language of a dissertation committee, which is a pretty standard format, and I'd like to make the point in the handbook that the supervisor who is the chair, the second reader who we may call as a consulting advisor, I've seen that language used in some places, and that a BGU rep, somebody from BGU specifically, I or someone else, would be a 3-person committee who would not just be involved in that oral review process, but could, instead of having just one supervisor giving input to that student, I would really like to have at least a second reader giving additional input throughout the process instead of just at the end. And I had suggested, even a $200 payment to that second reader, which again is fairly minimal, but I'm still very much in favor of doing something like that.
Okay, do you mind just creating a proposal that we can finalize and email it to all of us so that we can get feedback to you?
Okay, I'll do that.
Possibly discuss it and then finalize it by the next academic cabinet.
Yes, and just to clarify as well, since we are already in our approved budget year, of course, for 18-19, I couldn't see adding it at this point since it wasn't included in the budget. But if that's what you would like to do, I would strongly suggest that you put together in your proposal an estimated cost of, estimating how many second readers you're looking at how much, so we can perhaps add it into next year's budget and plan forward for including it, Bill, I think would be a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would not be for this year anyway.
Yeah, but because come spring, we will be starting our budget review for the following year. So I really would like to include that in budget plans going forward.
Okay.
This is Gwen, and as Bill knows, I'm not part of this academic cabinet as a voting member, but I would like to second what you said, Bill. In both of my dissertations, my second reader played a very important part in the development of both of my doctoral dissertations. And I believe that second voice is very important in the development. It's not just an end approval.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Whatever we do, I would like to use that dissertation committee language in the 2019-2020 handbook. And whether we can list a fee, the fee is not really listed in the handbook. It's just just the function of that person would be listed in the handbook. So whether or not we put the fee in, I guess I would still like to put that in the handbook with that dissertation committee language. But I'll put that out as an email to you.
Very good. And if I could get a copy of this, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Gwen. Bill, it's for you again. Creation of a final proposal subcommittee. I'm not sure that you were able to move on that project. Do you want to move it through email forward and then we finalize it next month?
Yeah. Proposal 7. Okay. Yeah. I thought we had just talked about that a few minutes ago. But yeah, I would like to have anybody who'd like to be a part of that kind of a discussion. So I'll just put out an email and people can respond.
Yeah, this is for the proposal review, right? So that you don't have to do everything all by yourself.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I was fixing that with the alternative project issue. Yeah, that would be good too. Yeah, to have that. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, let me read through that a little more, and then I'll put out an email.
Okay. Thank you so much. We're going to table any discussion regarding the PhD calendar. We are going to table that until the directors meeting in 2 weeks. So if as many of you could be present at the directors meeting, and Judy is going to try to draft the 2020-2021 calendar, and then we'll work this as well. Oh, sorry. This is one of my few students. Institutional issues, as I said earlier, I'll send you the tracks pre-visit report, and then we'll move from there. Do we have any other issues to discuss before we close?
No, but just for those of us who are old and ancient, the name was Cindy Lee, who became the director of the global program at Fuller. And Judy will remember Cindy, and Gwen probably as well.
Yeah, I kept thinking it was Joy Lee, and I thought, no, it wasn't Joy, but yeah, Lee, Cindy Lee.
Thank you, Lowell. Thank you.
Okay, any other news, updates, questions, inspiration? Well, we definitely need to continue to pray for Lowell, sorry. Lynn, we haven't heard much of you. Would you mind closing this meeting with prayer?
Not at all.
Thank you so much.
Heavenly Father, as you just listen to all the various things going on with people and families and that not only are on this call, but that we all interact with on a regular basis. It'd be impossible to put together a list that would be complete, but I'm just so grateful, God, that you don't need a list. You know our hearts, you know said things and unsaid things. And I just ask you, Father, for buckets of blessings, for wisdom, for each person to feel honored and respected and valued, no matter what country we represent or what our day-to-day work looks like, God. Help us, Father, to represent you well in every place that we go, and that you would receive the glory. In thy name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Lynn. And thank you all for